What if I told you that two ancient civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, both discovered the same terrifying truth about humanity's origin? The Hebrew book of Enoch speaks of the Watchers, rebellious angels who descended from heaven, corrupted mankind, and taught forbidden knowledge that nearly destroyed our world. Meanwhile, the Gnostic texts describe the Archons, malevolent beings who trapped humanity in a prison of flesh, feeding on our ignorance and suffering. Different names, different cultures, but the same story. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most suppressed mysteries. Were the Watchers and Archons actually the same entities? And if they were, what does that tell us about the true nature of our reality? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see the world around you. Let's start with the Watchers. Most people have never heard of them, even though their story predates much of the Bible we know today. The Book of Enoch was written around 300 BCE, but it describes events that supposedly happened long before the Great Flood. This text was considered scripture by early Christians and Jews. In fact, the New Testament itself references Enoch multiple times. Yet, mysteriously, the Book of Enoch was removed from most biblical canons and hidden away for centuries. Why? Because it contains information that powerful institutions didn't want you to know. According to Enoch, there were 200 angels called the Watchers, originally sent by God to observe humanity. But they didn't just watch. They became obsessed with human women, finding them beautiful beyond measure. Led by their chief Semjaza, these Watchers made a pact. They would descend to Mount Hermon and take human wives, fully knowing this act would damn them forever. The text is explicit about this. It names the leaders Semjaza, Azazel, Amaros, Barachiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, and others. Each had a specific role in what came next. When the Watchers mated with human women, they created offspring called the Nephilim giants, of tremendous strength and appetite. But the corruption didn't stop there. The Watchers began teaching humanity knowledge that was meant to remain hidden. Azazel taught men to forge weapons of war, swords, knives, shields, and armor. He revealed the art of making cosmetics and jewelry, which Enoch describes as tools of vanity and deception. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting, the foundations of pharmaceutical manipulation. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barachiel taught astrology. Kokabiel revealed the secrets of astronomy and constellations. Tamiel taught astrology and the seeing of the stars. Now, you might think, what's wrong with knowledge? Here's the critical point. This wasn't just information. It was power that humanity wasn't ready to wield. Weapons led to unprecedented violence. Cosmetics and enchantments led to manipulation and deception. Pharmaceutical knowledge was used to create potions that altered consciousness and corrupted the soul. The result: total chaos. The Nephilim devoured all the resources of humanity and then began eating people themselves. Violence spread across the earth like wildfire. Humanity cried out to heaven for deliverance, and their prayers reached the archangels. God's response was absolute. He sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel to deal with the Watchers. The Nephilim were ordered to turn on each other in mutual destruction. The Watchers themselves were bound in chains and imprisoned in valleys of darkness beneath the earth, where they would remain until the final judgment. And then came the flood, to cleanse the earth of the corruption these beings had introduced. But here's what's truly unsettling. According to Enoch, the spirits of the dead Nephilim didn't simply disappear. They became demons, disembodied entities forever wandering the earth, tormenting humanity until the end of time. The Watchers' rebellion wasn't just a mythological tale. It was presented as the origin point of evil in the material world, the moment when forbidden knowledge corrupted human innocence and brought suffering, war, and spiritual darkness to our realm. Now, Let's jump forward in time and shift our location from Hebrew tradition to the Gnostic schools of early Christianity and late antiquity. The Gnostics were mystics and philosophers who believed that salvation came through secret knowledge, gnosis rather than faith alone. Their texts were branded as heretical and systematically destroyed by the Roman Church. In 1945, a collection of these forbidden texts was discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, buried in a jar, hidden for over 600 years. Among these texts were shocking descriptions of beings called the Archons. According to Gnostic cosmology, the true God, the infinite, unknowable source, didn't create the material universe. Instead, a lesser, flawed being called the demiurge did. This demiurge is often equated with the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, a deity the Gnostics saw not as the supreme creator, but as an ignorant, arrogant entity who believed himself to be the only God. The demiurge created the Archons as his servants, rulers and authorities over the material realm. The word Archon literally means ruler in Greek. These beings were described as parasitic entities that feed on human fear, ignorance, and negative emotions. The Gnostic text, the hypostasis of the Archons, describes them in disturbing detail. They have strange, beast-like appearances, some with the faces of lions, others of serpents or dragons. They are called the authorities of darkness and rulers of the world. It are their primary function to keep humanity enslaved in the material world, ignorant of their true divine nature. The Archons created the physical body as a prison for the divine spark, the peace of the true God that exists within each human soul. They feed on worship, fear, and the energy generated by human suffering and ignorance. Sound familiar? The Gnostic text, the Apocryphon of John, reveals that the Archons cannot create life, only imitate it. They saw humanity, created with a divine spark from the true God, and became jealous. So they mated with human women to create a hybrid race that would be easier to control. Let me read you a direct passage. The Archons took counsel with one another and said, "Come, let us cause a deep sleep to fall upon Adam." And he slept. Now the deep sleep that they caused to fall upon him, and he slept, is ignorance. They use deception, manipulation, and false teachings to keep humanity in spiritual sleep. They present themselves as gods and demand worship. They create religious systems that emphasize guilt, fear, and unworthiness rather than the recognition of the divine spark within. According to the Gnostics, the Archons particularly target people at the moment of death, trying to trap souls in the reincarnation cycle, preventing them from returning to the true God beyond the material realm. The only escape: Gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of your true divine nature. The Gnostics believe that once you recognize the divine spark within you, the Archons lost their power over you. You could see through their deceptions and navigate past them after death. The similarities to the Watcher narrative are already appearing, aren't they? Rebellious supernatural beings, mating with humans, teaching corrupting knowledge, creating hybrid offspring, and trapping humanity in cycles of suffering and ignorance. But we're just getting started. Let's systematically break down the parallels between these two traditions, because they're far too specific to be coincidental. Parallel 1, the descent. Both the Watchers and the Archons are described as beings from a higher realm who descended or fell to earth. The Watchers descended from heaven to Mount Hermon. The Archons descended from the higher realms of light into the material darkness. In both cases, this descent represents a fall from grace, a movement away from the divine source toward matter and corruption. Parallel 2, sexual union with humans. This is where things get extremely specific. Both traditions explicitly describe these beings, mating with human women to create hybrid offspring. The Watchers produced the Nephilim giants with supernatural abilities but corrupted natures. The Archons created similar hybrid beings to establish bloodlines they could more easily control. The Gnostic text, the Apocryphon of John, states, They brought gold and silver, and gifts and copper and iron and metal, and all kinds of things. And they seduced the women who were with them, and they begot children out of darkness. This isn't vague symbolism. Both texts describe actual physical mating, producing actual hybrid offspring. Parallel. 3. Forbidden knowledge. Both groups are described as teachers of corrupting knowledge. The Watchers taught weapon-making, sorcery, astrology, and manipulative arts. The Archons taught false religious systems, counterfeit spiritual practices, and knowledge designed to deepen humanity's bondage to matter. The key distinction is this: not all knowledge is evil, but knowledge given with malicious intent, or given before humanity is ready to use it wisely, becomes a weapon of corruption. Parallel 4. Creating chaos. And suffering. Both the Watchers and Archons are blamed for introducing violence, warfare, oppression, and spiritual darkness to humanity. Before their intervention, both traditions suggest humanity existed in a more innocent state. The Watchers' gifts led to warfare, and the Nephilim devouring humanity. The Archons' manipulation led to spiritual ignorance and endless cycles of suffering. Parallel 5. Feeding on humanity. Here's a chilling detail. Both traditions describe these beings as feeding off humanity in some way. The Nephilim literally consumed humans. The Archons feed on negative human emotions, fear, anger, despair, and worship directed toward false gods. The Gnostic texts describe the Archons as parasitic entities who need humanity's energy to sustain themselves. This is why they work so hard to keep humans in states of fear and ignorance. These emotional states generate the energy they consume. Parallel 6. Imprisonment and judgment. Both traditions describe these beings as eventually facing divine judgment. The Watchers are bound in chains beneath the earth until the final judgment day. The Archons are described as ultimately powerless against those who achieve gnosis and are destined for destruction when the material world is dissolved. Parallel 7. Their spirits remain. Perhaps most disturbing, both traditions teach that even though these beings have been defeated or bound, their influence continues. The spirits of the dead Nephilim became demons. The Archons continue to operate through religious and political systems of control. These aren't loose thematic similarities. These are detailed, specific parallels in narrative structure, character function, and theological purpose. So here's the question we must confront. Are the Watchers and Archons the same beings, described by different cultures using different terminology? Let's consider the evidence, geographical and cultural connections. The Middle East was a crossroads of ideas. The Book of Enoch emerged from Hebrew tradition, but by the time of early Christianity, Jewish, Greek, Egyptian, and Persian ideas were mixing in Alexandria, Antioch, and other major cities. The Gnostics were operating in exactly these cultural melting pots. They had access to Jewish texts, including Enoch. Early Gnostic teachers like Valentinus and Basilides were well versed in Hebrew scripture. It's entirely possible, even likely, that Gnostic thinkers encountered the Watcher narrative and recognized it as describing the same entities they called Archons. They may have simply been synthesizing and reinterpreting the same fundamental truth using their own philosophical framework. Theological function. Both the Watchers and Archons serve the same role in their respective cosmologies. They explain the origin of evil, suffering, and humanity's fallen state. They answer the question, if God is good and all-powerful, why is the world full of suffering and evil? The answer in both systems, rebellious supernatural beings corrupted God's creation and trapped humanity in a degraded state. The name connection. Here's something fascinating. Some Gnostic texts actually name specific Archons, and these names have connections to the names of the Watchers. For example, the name Saklas is used for the chief Archon in some texts. This name is related to Samael, which in Jewish tradition is another name for Satan and is sometimes connected to the watcher Semjaza. The demon Azazel, one of the chief watchers, appears in Gnostic texts as an archon associated with the wilderness and scapegoating, directly connecting to the Yom Kippur ritual, where a goat is sent to Azazel in the desert. The planetary connection. Both traditions associate these beings with the planets and stars. The Watchers taught astrology and the secrets of the heavens. The Gnostics believed the Archons ruled over the 7 planetary spheres that souls must pass through after death. In Gnostic cosmology, each planet is ruled by an Archon who tries to trap ascending souls. The names of these planetary Archons often correspond to the traditional names of the Watchers: Adona, Sun; Sabaoth, Mars; Astaphios, Venus; Yaldabaoth, Saturn. The counter-argument now, in fairness, there are scholars who argue these are separate traditions that evolved independently to explain similar human experiences with evil and suffering. They point out that the Watchers are described as originally good angels who fell through desire, while the Archons are described as inherently flawed creations of a flawed demiurge. They note that the Book of Enoch is older than the Gnostic texts and comes from a different religious framework. But here's what that counter-argument misses. Just because one text is older doesn't mean the entities they describe are different. It could simply mean that humanity's understanding of these entities evolved over time. The Hebrews understood them as fallen angels. The Gnostics, with their more dualistic philosophy, understood them as the malformed creations of a false god. Same entities, different interpretive frameworks. If the Watchers and Archons are indeed the same beings, or at least the same class of entities, what does that mean for us today? First, it means that ancient humanity, across multiple cultures, was trying to warn us about something real. These weren't just bedtime stories or primitive superstitions. These were attempts to describe and understand non-human intelligences that interact with our world. Second, it means the systems of control we see today, political, religious, economic, may have very ancient roots. Both traditions describe these beings as operating through institutional structures that keep humanity ignorant and divided. The Watchers taught technologies of war. The Archons created false religious systems. Both worked to keep humanity trapped in cycles of suffering. Look around at our world today. We have unprecedented technological knowledge, yet we use it to create more sophisticated weapons. We have access to more information than ever before, yet populations remain divided and manipulated by fear. We have material abundance, yet spiritual emptiness. Could it be that the influence of these ancient entities continues through the very systems we believe serve us? Third, both traditions offer the same solution: awakening. Enoch teaches that righteousness, prayer, and divine knowledge can protect you from these entities. The Gnostics teach that gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of your divine nature, breaks their power over you. Both systems agree ignorance is the primary weapon these beings use against us. Therefore, knowledge, true knowledge, not the corrupting knowledge they offer, is our primary defense. Fourth, it means we need to be extremely careful about what knowledge we pursue and who we learn from. The Watchers didn't just teach random information, they taught knowledge designed to corrupt and control. Technology without wisdom leads to destruction. Information without understanding leads to manipulation. In our modern age of information overload, this warning has never been more relevant. We're drowning in data, but starving for wisdom. The modern manifestation. Some researchers believe these entities, whether you call them Watchers, Archons, or something else, continue to operate today through various means: social engineering and mass psychological manipulation. Technologies that disconnect us from nature and spiritual awareness. Economic systems that keep people in survival mode, unable to pursue higher understanding. religions and ideologies that emphasized fear, guilt, and unworthiness rather than the divine potential within each person, entertainment and media that glorify violence, but these ancient texts suggest that certain patterns of control and corruption have their roots in non-human intelligences that understood human psychology long before modern social scientists were born. Here's where we venture into truly controversial territory. Why were these texts suppressed? The Book of Enoch was removed from most biblical canons. The Gnostic texts were declared heretical and destroyed, their followers persecuted. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which contain fragments of Enoch, were hidden away for 2,000 years. The official reason given by religious authorities is that these texts were apocryphal, meaning their authorship was uncertain and their teachings contradicted established doctrine. But let's think critically. What teachings did they contradict? Both the Book of Enoch and the Gnostic texts teach that evil in our world has a specific, identifiable source. That source is non-human intelligences that can be resisted. Institutional religious authority is not the only path to spiritual truth. Direct personal experience of the divine is possible. They suggest that the institutions claiming to be humanity's only connection to God might themselves be influenced by the very entities they're supposed to protect us from. Is it any wonder these texts were suppressed? Consider this. If the Watchers and Archons represent real entities or forces that feed on human ignorance and fear, the last thing they would want is for humanity to have access to texts that explain exactly what they are and how they operate. The most effective prison is the one where the prisoners don't know they're imprisoned. Both Enoch and the Gnostic texts are, in essence, prison break manuals. They describe the prison, name the guards, and provide maps for escape. Before we conclude, we need to address one more piece of evidence. Similar beings appear in cultures around the world that had no contact with Hebrew or Gnostic traditions. In Sumerian texts, we find the Anunnaki beings from the heavens who came to Earth, created hybrid humans, and taught advanced knowledge. The Sumerian myths predate the Hebrew texts and describe the same basic pattern. In Hindu tradition, we find the Asuras, powerful beings who oppose the Devas, gods, and constantly work to corrupt and control humanity. They're associated with material desire and illusion. In Islamic tradition, the jinn are described as beings made of smokeless fire who inhabit an unseen dimension parallel to ours. Some jinn rebelled against God and worked to lead humans astray. Their leader, Iblis, refused to bow to Adam and was cast out, mirroring the Watcher narrative. In Native American traditions, various tribes describe star people, or sky beings, who came to Earth in ancient times. Some of these beings were benevolent, but others taught dangerous knowledge and created chaos. In Buddhist cosmology, we find the Maras beings that feed on and encourage human suffering, desire, and delusion. They work to keep humans trapped in the cycle of samsara, unable to achieve enlightenment. The pattern repeats globally. Beings from another realm, interaction with humans, hybrid offspring or possessed humans, corrupting knowledge, cycles of control and suffering, and the need for spiritual awakening to escape their influence. This level of consistency across cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years suggests we're not dealing with mere mythology. We're dealing with humanity's attempt to describe and understand something that actually happened, or is still happening. So, are the Watchers and Archons two names for the same ancient evil? Based on the evidence we've examined, the answer appears to be yes, with important nuances. They are, at minimum, the same class of beings, non-human intelligences that interact with our world, who corrupted humanity through forbidden knowledge and biological interference, who feed on human suffering and ignorance, and who continue to influence our world through systems of control. Whether they are literally the same individual entities described by different cultures, or different factions within a larger hierarchy of such beings, the functional reality is the same. Humanity has been, and continues to be, influenced by forces that work to keep us ignorant of our true nature and potential. The good news embedded in both traditions is this: these beings can be resisted. Their power is not absolute. Knowledge, awareness, spiritual practice, and connection to the true divine source all break their hold. The Watchers were bound. The Archons can be seen through and transcended. Both traditions teach that these entities have already lost. They're just fighting a desperate rearguard action before their final defeat. Your awareness of them is the first step in breaking their influence. Your refusal to live in fear, ignorance, and spiritual sleep is an act of rebellion against their agenda. The ancient texts were preserved despite all attempts to destroy them because humanity needed this knowledge. You needed this knowledge. Now you have it. What you do with it is up to you. If this video has opened your eyes to connections you've never seen before, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're going to continue exploring the hidden truths that ancient texts reveal about our reality. Drop a comment below. Do you think the Watchers and Archons are the same beings? Have you experienced anything that makes you believe these entities are real? Let's discuss. And remember, knowledge without action is just entertainment. True gnosis, true awakening, requires you to actually change how you live, think, and interact with the world. The prison guards are counting on you to stay asleep. Don't give them the satisfaction. Until next time, stay awake, stay aware, and keep seeking the truth.